The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the trading post, and Rose Hartwell stepped down into the biting January wind of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Her fingers so numb she could barely feel the handle of her carpetbag. The year was 1878, and everything about this dusty frontier town felt as foreign to her as the surface of the moon. She had left Boston 3 weeks ago with a heart full of grief and a mind churning with uncertainty, running from the wreckage of her former life where scandal had painted her name black as pitch. Her fiancé had abandoned her at the altar when whispers spread that her father's bank had collapsed under debts and fraud, leaving her family destitute and her reputation in tatters. The cold that seeped into her bones was not just from the high desert winter, but from the hollow emptiness inside her chest, the certainty that she belonged nowhere and to no one. She stood on the wooden boardwalk, watching the stagecoach rumble away in a cloud of dust, and felt the weight of every eye in town measuring her worth. Her dark traveling dress was too fine for this rough place, marking her as an outsider, and her pale face bore the exhaustion of weeks spent rattling across the country toward an uncertain future. She had come here because her mother's distant cousin had written offering work as a schoolteacher, but now that she stood in this strange land surrounded by adobe buildings and unfamiliar faces, doubt crashed over her like an ocean wave. "You look lost, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and warm despite the cold wind. Rose turned to find a man watching her from beside a hitching post where a gray horse stood patiently. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat over worn denim and a hat that shadowed eyes the color of summer sky. Something about the way he stood, relaxed but alert, spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin and in this harsh landscape. His face was weathered by sun and wind, probably in his late 20s, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily even though it was serious now. "I am lost," Rose admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the genuine concern in his expression. "I am looking for Clara Morrison. I was told she lives near the plaza." "Mrs. Morrison is my neighbor," the man said, stepping closer. "I am Grant Carson. I have a ranch about 2 miles outside town, but I come in for supplies most weeks." He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away but somehow could not. "You are the cousin from back east she has been expecting." "Second cousin, twice removed," Rose said, her voice catching slightly. "Rose Hartwell. I arrived on today's stage from Kansas City." "Well, Miss Hartwell, you are frozen clean through." Grant's voice held a matter-of-fact kindness that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "Mrs. Morrison's house is a good walk from here, and the wind is picking up. Let me drive you there in my wagon. I have business that direction anyway." Rose wanted to refuse out of habit and propriety, but the cold was seeping deeper into her bones, and she could feel the curious stares of townspeople like pinpricks on her skin. "I would be grateful," she said quietly. Grant gestured toward a wagon parked outside the trading post, then took her carpetbag without asking permission. His movements were efficient and considerate as he helped her up onto the wooden seat, his hand steady and warm even through her glove. He swung up beside her and snapped the reins, guiding the horses through the rutted street with practiced ease. They rode in silence for a few minutes, the wagon wheels creaking and the wind whistling past them. Rose pulled her shawl tighter and tried not to shiver, but her body betrayed her with tremors she could not control. "Here." Grant shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth of it enveloped her immediately, carrying the scent of leather and wood smoke, and something clean and masculine that made her heart do a strange flutter. "You will freeze," Rose objected, though she clutched the coat gratefully. I have been in worse cold than this, Grant said with a slight smile. Besides, I cannot have Mrs. Morrison's cousin arriving as an icicle. She would never forgive me. Despite herself, Rose felt a small smile tug at her lips, the first in weeks. You know her well enough. She is a good woman, helped my mother when she was dying 4 years back. Grant's voice grew quieter. Sat with her through the nights, made sure she was not in pain. I owe her a debt I can never repay. Rose looked at him with new interest. There was a depth to this cowboy that surprised her, a gentleness beneath the rough exterior. I am sorry about your mother. Thank you. Grant glanced at her, and something passed between them, an understanding of loss. What brings you all this way from the East, Mrs. Morrison mentioned teaching, but that is a long journey for a schoolhouse position. Rose's smile faded and she looked down at her hands. The truth sat bitter on her tongue, but she was tired of pretending. I had to leave Boston. My family lost everything, and I was engaged to a man who proved himself a coward when fortune turned against us. There was nothing left for me there but shame and whispers. She expected judgment or pity, but Grant simply nodded as though she had told him something as ordinary as the weather. Fresh starts are what the West is built on, he said. Half the people in Santa Fe came here running from something or someone. What matters is what you do now, not what happened before. His words were simple, but they struck something deep in Rose's chest. She had expected to find only more judgment here, more reasons to doubt herself, but this stranger offered acceptance as easily as breathing. You truly believe that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a neat adobe house with blue shutters and a small garden plot bordered by river stones. He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes direct and earnest. I will prove that you belong right here, Miss Hartwell. This land does not care about your past or your family name. It only cares about your character and your will to make something of yourself. You have come this far, which tells me you have plenty of both. Rose felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and hot. No one had spoken to her with such confidence in months, as though her worth was not tied to her father's failures or her former fiancé's cruelty. You do not even know me. Not yet, Grant said, and his smile was warm enough to chase away some of the cold. But I am a fair judge of character, and something tells me you are stronger than you think you are. Before Rose could respond, the door of the adobe house flew open, and a plump woman with gray streaked brown hair came bustling out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Rose. Oh, my dear child, you are finally here. Grant Carson, thank you for bringing her. Come inside, both of you, before this wind freezes you solid. The next hour passed in a blur of warmth and welcome. Clara Morrison turned out to be everything her letters had promised, kind and practical and full of an energy that seemed to fill the small house. She made tea and pressed warm bread with butter into Rose's hands, chattering about the town and the school and the people Rose would meet. Grant stayed long enough to carry Rose's trunk inside from where the stage had delivered it earlier, refusing offers of food or drink. I should get back, he said, settling his hat back on his head. I have horses that need tending before dark. Thank you, Rose said, standing to face him. She held out his coat, reluctant to part with its warmth but knowing she must. For everything. Grant took the coat, his fingers brushing hers briefly. I meant what I said, Miss Hartwell. You belong here just as much as anyone. I hope you will let me prove it to you. He tipped his hat to Clara and left, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. Rose stood staring at it, feeling strangely bereft. That Grant Carson is a good man, Clara said, appearing at her elbow with a knowing look. His father was a hard man, drank too much and ran the ranch into the ground, but Grant turned it all around after he passed. Works harder than 3 men, and he has a heart bigger than the territory itself. Rose felt her cheeks warm. He was very kind. Kind and handsome, Clara said with a wink. Half the unmarried women in town have set their caps at him, but he has never shown interest in any of them. Says he is too busy with the ranch. She patted Rose's arm. But I saw the way he looked at you, dear. Like you were something precious he was afraid might break. You are imagining things, Rose said, but her heart beat a little faster. The next days unfolded with a strange mixture of comfort and challenge. Clara's home was cozy, and her companionship was easy, but Rose could not shake the feeling of being watched whenever she ventured into town. Santa Fe was smaller than Boston, and gossip traveled fast. She heard whispers about the fallen Boston banker's daughter, saw the calculating looks from women at the mercantile, felt the weight of judgment she had hoped to escape. The school was a small adobe building near the church, with rough wooden benches and a pot-bellied stove that barely kept the January cold at bay. Rose had 16 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, children of ranchers and shopkeepers and laborers, their faces reflecting the diverse tapestry of New Mexico. Some were eager to learn, clutching precious slates and chalk. Others were sullen, clearly preferring to be anywhere else. On her 3rd day of teaching, Rose stood at the front of the classroom trying to maintain order as 2 boys scuffled in the back row over a stolen pencil. She raised her voice, attempting to sound authoritative, but doubt crept in. What did she know about teaching? She had never worked a day in her life before this, had been raised for parlors and piano recitals, not frontier schoolhouses and unruly children. Boys, that is enough, she said, but they ignored her, their scuffle turning into a genuine fight that knocked over a bench with a crash. The door opened, letting in a blast of cold air and Grant Carson. He took in the scene with one swift glance, strode to the back of the room, and separated the 2 boys with firm but gentle hands. "Daniel, Marcus, I believe Miss Hartwell told you to stop," he said quietly. His voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that made both boys freeze. "When a lady tells you something, you listen. Understood?" Both boys nodded mutely, suddenly fascinated with their shoes. "Good. Now apologize and sit down." The boys mumbled apologies and scrambled to their seats, shooting Grant looks of mingled respect and fear. The rest of the class had gone completely silent, watching with wide eyes. Grant turned to Rose, and his expression softened. "Sorry for interrupting, Miss Hartwell. I was passing by and heard the commotion." Rose felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. She should have been able to handle 2 fighting boys on her own, but instead, she needed rescuing like some helpless damsel. "Thank you, Mr. Carson." "Grant," he corrected gently. Then louder, addressing the class, "You all are lucky to have Miss Hartwell as your teacher. She came all the way from Boston, where they have the finest schools in the country, to teach you. I suggest you show her the respect she deserves, or you will answer to me. Clear?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," followed. Grant tipped his hat to Rose and left, leaving her classroom remarkably more subdued and attentive. She managed to get through the rest of the day without incident, but the encounter left her feeling unsettled. She should have been grateful, but instead she felt inadequate, as though she had confirmed everyone's doubts, including her own. That evening, Clara had to visit a sick friend, so Rose sat alone in the small parlor, trying to read by lamplight but finding the words swimming before her eyes. When a knock came at the door, she started, then rose to answer it. Grant stood on the doorstep, hat in hand, looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "Miss Hartwell, I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to apologize for this morning." "Apologize?" Rose repeated, confused. You helped me. I undermined you, Grant said, his jaw tight. I swooped in like you could not handle your own classroom, and that was wrong. You are their teacher, not me. I made you look weak in front of your students, and I have been kicking myself all day for it. Rose stared at him, surprise washing over her. In Boston, men had constantly swooped in to handle things for her, treating her like a porcelain doll, and not one had ever questioned whether that was appropriate. I did need help, she admitted. I was losing control. You were finding your footing, Grant countered. Every new teacher faces challenges. I should have stayed outside and let you handle it, or at least asked if you wanted help before barging in like some kind of hero. Despite herself, Rose smiled. You were rather heroic. Grant's expression eased into a sheepish grin. Maybe a little, but my point stands. You are stronger than I gave you credit for, and I am sorry. Apology accepted, Rose said softly. Then, impulsively, would you like to come in? Clara is out, but I could make coffee. She saw him hesitate, weighing propriety against desire, and for a moment she thought he would refuse. But then he nodded. I would like that. They sat in Clara's small parlor, drinking coffee that Rose made too strong because she still was not used to the wood stove, and talked. Grant told her about his ranch, about the horses he raised and trained, about the land he loved with a fierce devotion that shone in his eyes. Rose found herself telling him about Boston, about the libraries and theaters she missed, about her father who had been brilliant but reckless, about the loneliness of being decorative rather than useful. I always felt like I was waiting for my life to start, she confessed, surprised by her own honesty. Like I was just a placeholder until some man came along to give me purpose. And then when that man left, I realized I had no idea who I was without him. Grant leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intent on her face. So who are you, Rose Hartwell? No one had ever asked her that before. I do not know yet, she admitted, but I want to find out. Then you are already on the right path, Grant said. His smile was like sunshine, warm and genuine. And for what it is worth, I think you are going to be an excellent teacher once you find your stride. Those kids need someone who cares, and I can see that you do. How can you see that? Rose asked. You barely know me. I see it in the way you looked at them today, even when they were giving you trouble, Grant said. You were not just annoyed or angry, you were worried about failing them. That is what makes a good teacher. Rose felt her eyes sting with tears she refused to shed. What if I do fail them? Then you will get up and try again, Grant said simply. That is what people do out here. We fail, we learn, we keep going. The land teaches you that quick enough. They talked until Clara returned home, and Grant left with another tip of his hat and a promise to stop by the school in a few days to see how things were going, if Rose did not mind. She did not mind at all. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Rose with its comfort. She woke each morning before dawn, helped Clara with breakfast, then walked to the schoolhouse through the cold, clear January air. Teaching was harder than anything she had ever done, requiring patience and creativity and a firmness she had to cultivate, but gradually she began to find her footing. The children tested her less as they came to respect her, and she learned their personalities and their struggles. Maria, the quiet girl in the front row, was brilliant at mathematics but terrified to speak aloud. Young Thomas stuttered but had a gift for drawing. The older boys were tough but responded to genuine interest in their lives. Grant appeared with surprising regularity, always with some excuse. He was in town for supplies, or he wanted to drop off a book he thought she might enjoy, or he was checking on Mrs. Morrison. But Rose noticed he always managed to arrive around the time school let out, and he often walked her back to Clara's house, carrying her books and asking about her day. They talked about everything and nothing. Grant told her stories about the ranch, about difficult horses and winter storms and the satisfaction of watching something you raised with your own hands thrive. Rose told him about the books she loved, about the worlds they opened up, about her dream of creating a real library in Santa Fe someday. He listened like her words mattered, like her dreams were not foolish but worthy of respect. "You make me believe I could actually do it," she told him one afternoon as they walked slowly through the plaza, where the winter sun created pockets of warmth despite the cold air. "Because you can," Grant said. "Rose, you have this idea that you are not capable of things, but you have already done something remarkable. You left everything familiar and traveled halfway across the country to start over. That takes courage most people do not have." "It did not feel like courage," Rose said. "It felt like running away. Running towards something can look the same as running away from something," Grant said. "What matters is where you land and what you do once you are there." Rose stopped walking and turned to face him. The plaza was nearly empty at this hour, most people inside escaping the cold. The winter light caught in Grant's fair hair, turning it almost gold, and his blue eyes were steady on hers with an expression that made her breath catch. "Why do you care so much?" she asked quietly. "About whether I succeed or belong here." Grant was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as though he was choosing his words carefully. "Because I know what it is like to feel like you do not fit," he said finally. "My father was a drunk and a gambler, ran up debts all over the territory. When he died, I inherited those debts along with a failing ranch. Half the town thought I would cut and run, and the other half thought I was as worthless as he was. But a few people believed in me, gave me a chance to prove myself. Mrs. Morrison was one of them. She convinced the bank to give me time to make good on the debts, vouched for my character when I had not earned it yet. I would have lost everything without her faith in me." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was lower, more intense. "When I saw you step off that stage, frozen and lost and trying so hard to be brave, I saw myself 5 years ago. And I thought, maybe I could be for you what Mrs. Morrison was for me. Someone who believes you belong before you believe it yourself." Rose felt something crack open in her chest, a warmth flooding through her that had nothing to do with the winter sun. "That is what you meant when you said you would prove I belong here." "Yes," Grant said. "But Rose, I have to be honest with you. It started out that way, but it has become something more. I look forward to seeing you every day. I find excuses to come to town just to walk with you for 10 minutes. When something happens on the ranch, you are the first person I want to tell. And when you smile, really smile, it is like the whole world gets brighter." Rose's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Grant, you do not have to say anything," Grant interrupted gently. "I know you came here to build a life for yourself, not to fall into some cowboy's arms. I do not want to be another man who tries to define you or limit you. I just wanted you to know how I feel, so there is honesty between us." Rose stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What if I want to fall into your arms?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What if I am tired of being careful and proper, and I just want to feel something real for once?" Grant's eyes darkened, and his hand came up to cup her cheek with a gentleness that made her want to weep. "Then I will catch you," he said. "Every single time." He kissed her there in the plaza in full view of anyone who might be watching, and Rose did not care. His lips were warm and soft and tasted like possibility. She wound her arms around his neck and let herself fall, trusting him to keep his promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "Rose Hartwell, you are going to be the talk of the town." "Let them talk," Rose said, and meant it. For the first time since arriving in Santa Fe, she felt completely present in her own life, making a choice that was hers alone. But Santa Fe was indeed a small town, and talk spread fast. By the next morning, Clara was giving Rose knowing looks over breakfast, and by the afternoon, Rose noticed the whispers intensifying when she walked through town. Some of the looks were approving, but others were cold, speculative. She heard fragments of conversation that made her cheeks burn. Fast, that one, and barely here a month and already has her claws in Carson. And what does he see in some disgraced Eastern woman? Rose tried to ignore it, but doubt crept back in during the dark hours of night. Was she moving too fast? Was she being foolish, falling for the first kind man who showed her attention? What if Grant came to regret his interest once the novelty wore off, and he saw all her flaws and inadequacies? She saw less of Grant over the next few days, not because he stopped coming by, but because she made excuses to avoid him. She needed to focus on teaching, she told him. She had lessons to plan, papers to grade. The weather was too cold for walking. Each excuse was transparent, and she could see the hurt in his eyes, but she could not seem to stop herself from pulling away. On Saturday evening, nearly a week after their kiss, a knock came at Clara's door just as Rose was helping clean up after supper. Clara answered it, then turned to Rose with a gentle smile. "It is for you, dear." Grant stood on the doorstep, looking tired and windblown. "Can we talk?" he asked without preamble. Rose's first instinct was to make another excuse, but something in his expression stopped her. She nodded, grabbed her shawl, and followed him outside. They walked in silence toward the edge of town, where the land opened up into rolling hills painted silver by moonlight. The cold bit at Rose's cheeks, but she welcomed the clarity it brought. Finally, Grant stopped and turned to face her. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked bluntly. "Because you have been avoiding me, and I need to know if I pushed too hard or moved too fast, or—" "It is not you," Rose interrupted. "Grant, it is me. I am afraid." "Of what?" Grant's voice was gentle now, coaxing. "Of this," Rose said, gesturing between them. "Of caring about someone again and being disappointed. Of thinking I belong somewhere only to discover I was fooling myself. Of being talked about and judged and found wanting." Her voice cracked. "I heard what people are saying about me, about us. They think I am using you, or that I am not good enough for you, or that I am exactly the kind of scandalous woman they suspected I was." Grant stepped closer, his hands settling on her shoulders. "Rose, listen to me. There will always be people who talk, who judge, who try to make you small because they are small themselves. You cannot live your life according to their opinions. I learned that the hard way." "But what if they are right?" Rose whispered. "What if I am not strong enough for this life, for this place? What if I fail at teaching, or I fail you, or—" "Stop," Grant said firmly. "Rose, you are not going to fail. Are there going to be hard days? Yes. Are you going to make mistakes? Of course. But that is not failure. Failure is giving up, letting fear win." He tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "I told you I would prove that you belong here, and I meant it. But you have to let me. You have to stop running from the very thing you came here to find." "What did I come here to find?" Rose asked. "Yourself," Grant said. "A life that is yours, not defined by anyone else's expectations or judgments. A place where you can be brave and imperfect and real." Tears spilled down Rose's cheeks, hot against her cold skin. "I do not know how to be those things." "You are already being them," Grant said, wiping her tears with his thumb. "You were brave when you got on that stage in Boston. You were real when you told me about your fears instead of pretending you do not have any. And you are perfect in your imperfection, Rose. That is what makes you human, what makes you worth knowing." Rose let out a shaky laugh. "You make it sound so simple." It is simple, Grant said. Not easy, but simple. You decide what matters to you and you fight for it. Everything else is just noise. He paused, his expression turning serious. I am fighting for you, Rose, for us. But I cannot do it alone. You have to fight too. Rose looked at him, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and belief, and made a choice. She rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring into it all the feelings she had been too afraid to voice. Grant responded immediately, pulling her close, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard in the cold night air, Rose said, I am done running. I want this. I want you. I want to build a life here, and I want you in it. Grant's smile was brilliant even in the darkness. Then let me court you properly. Let me take you to the town dance next Saturday. Let everyone see that I am proud to be with you. The whole town will talk, Rose warned. Let them, Grant said, echoing her words from the plaza. We will give them something worth talking about. The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of nervous excitement. Clara helped Rose alter one of her Boston dresses, a deep blue silk that Rose had thought she would never wear again. It seemed too fine for Santa Fe, but Clara insisted. You are going to walk into that dance on Grant Carson's arm, and you are going to show everyone that you belong, Clara said firmly, her needle flashing as she took in the waist. Besides, that man is going to swallow his tongue when he sees you in this. Rose laughed, some of her nervousness easing. You have been a fairy godmother to me, Clara. I do not know how to thank you. You already have, dear, Clara said, patting her hand. You gave me a reason to dust off my hosting skills and someone to fuss over. I have missed having young people around since my own children moved to California. On Saturday evening, Rose stood in front of Clara's small mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The blue dress brought out the color of her gray eyes, and Clara had helped arrange her dark hair in a softer style than the severe bun she usually wore. She looked like someone confident and pretty, someone who might belong at a frontier dance on a rancher's arm. When Grant arrived to collect her, his expression confirmed Clara's prediction. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, staring at Rose like he had never seen her before. You look beautiful, he finally managed, his voice rough. Rose felt herself blush. Thank you, you look very handsome yourself. Grant had clearly made an effort, wearing a clean white shirt and a string tie, his hair still damp from washing. He offered her his arm, and they walked together through the cold February evening toward the community hall where the dance was being held. Rose could hear the music and laughter before they even entered, fiddles and guitars creating a lively tune that made her feet want to move. But when they stepped through the door, the noise level dropped noticeably as people turned to stare. Rose's steps faltered, old insecurities rushing back, but Grant squeezed her hand where it rested on his arm. Head up, he murmured. You have every right to be here. They made their way into the hall, and gradually the noise level rose again as people returned to their own conversations. But Rose could feel the weight of attention, see the calculating looks from some of the women and the assessing gazes from the men. Grant Carson, you made it. A hearty voice boomed across the hall, and a large man with a magnificent mustache approached, hand extended. And you brought the new school teacher. Miss Hartwell, I am Tom Bradley. I own the Mercantile. My daughter Sarah is in your class. Yes, Sarah is a wonderful student, Rose said, grateful for the friendly opening. She talks about you constantly, Tom said with a grin. Says you make learning interesting, not like the last teacher who just had them copying Bible verses all day. He leaned in conspiratorially. Between you and me, that was my wife's cousin, and even I thought he was duller than dishwater. Rose laughed, some of her tension easing. Other people approached, most of them friendly, asking about the school or introducing themselves. Grant stayed at her side, his hand at the small of her back, a steady presence that gave her confidence. When the music shifted to a waltz, Grant turned to her with a question in his eyes. "May I have this dance?" "I would be honored," Rose said. He led her onto the dance floor, and as his hand settled at her waist and he drew her close, Rose felt the rest of the world fade away. Grant was a good dancer, moving with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything else. They swayed together and Rose let herself relax into the rhythm, into the warmth of his body close to hers. "You are doing beautifully," Grant murmured near her ear. "I am terrified," Rose admitted. "I know," Grant said, "but you are here anyway. That is what courage looks like." They danced 3 more dances, until Rose's feet ached and her cheeks hurt from smiling. Between dances, Grant introduced her to more people. Other ranchers, townspeople, families of her students. Most were welcoming, curious about the woman who had captured Grant Carson's attention. But not everyone was friendly. During a break in the music, as Grant went to fetch them punch, a woman approached Rose. She was beautiful in a hard way, with honey-colored hair and sharp green eyes. Rose recognized her as Lily Phillips, daughter of one of the wealthier ranchers in the area. "So you are the Boston woman," Lily said without preamble. "I heard about your family's scandal. Must have been quite the fall from grace." Rose felt her cheeks burn but kept her voice level. "I did not realize my personal history was of such interest." "Everything about you is of interest when you are sniffing around the most eligible bachelor in the territory," Lily said, her smile cold. "Grant needs a woman who understands this life, not some soft Eastern girl playing at being a pioneer." "I am not playing at anything," Rose said, anger giving her strength. "And my relationship with Grant is none of your concern." "I am making it my concern," Lily said, stepping closer. "Grant and I have an understanding. His ranch borders my father's land. It would be a logical match, beneficial to both families. You are just a distraction, a novelty that will wear off once he realizes you are nothing but trouble with a pretty face." "That is enough, Lily." Grant's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He appeared at Rose's side, his expression harder than Rose had ever seen it. "Rose is with me, and I do not appreciate you speaking to her this way." Lily's face flushed an ugly red. "Grant, I am just trying to help you see reason. We have never had an understanding," Grant said firmly. "You assumed something that was never there. I respect your father, but I have never given you any indication of romantic interest. I am asking you to respect Rose and to respect me by accepting that." Lily looked between them, her eyes glittering with anger and humiliation, then turned and stalked away. Rose let out a shaky breath. "Well, I certainly made an impression." "Lily has been pursuing me for 2 years," Grant said, his tone apologetic. "I have tried to be clear that I am not interested, but she has not wanted to hear it. I am sorry she took it out on you." "She said I am just a novelty," Rose said quietly, "that I will bring you nothing but trouble." Grant turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Rose, look at me. You are not a novelty. You are the most real thing that has happened to me in years. And as for trouble, I can handle trouble. What I cannot handle is a life without you in it." His words warmed her from the inside out, melting the cold knot of doubt that Lily's words had created. "Grant, I am falling in love with you. It terrifies me, but it is true." Grant's eyes widened, then softened with an emotion so intense it made Rose's breath catch. "I am already there," he said. "I have been since the day I met you. I love you, Rose Hartwell, with everything I am." He kissed her right there in the middle of the dance, in full view of everyone, and Rose kissed him back without hesitation. Let them all see. Let them all know that she belonged here with him, building something real and true. The rest of the dance passed in a haze of happiness. Rose barely noticed the stares or whispers anymore. She danced with Grant and laughed with Clara and felt, for the first time since leaving Boston, like she had found her place in the world. When Grant walked her home in the cold midnight air, they moved slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. At Clara's door, Grant pulled her close, his arms wrapped around her waist. "I know we have not been courting long," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "But I am a man who knows what he wants, and I want a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are mine and I am yours. I want to build something lasting, something real." "So do I," Rose said, her heart full to bursting. "Grant, I came to Santa Fe thinking I was running away, but I was really running toward you, toward this." "Then marry me," Grant said. "Not right this moment, but soon. In the spring, when the world is coming back to life. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that you belong right here with me." Rose felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy this time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Grant whooped and picked her up, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her forget the cold entirely. "I am going to do everything in my power to make you happy," he promised. "You already have," Rose said. The winter months that followed were the happiest of Rose's life. She continued teaching, finding her confidence growing with each passing day. The children responded to her increasing assurance, and she discovered she had a talent for making lessons engaging and relevant to their lives. She started a small lending library in the schoolhouse, sharing her own books and soliciting donations from families in town. It was not the grand library she had dreamed of, but it was a start. Grant came to town whenever he could spare time from the ranch, which was often in winter when the work was slower. They went on long walks despite the cold, talked for hours in Clara's warm parlor, made plans for their future. Grant told her about the ranch house his father had let fall into disrepair, about his plans to fix it up and make it a real home. Rose contributed ideas, imagining curtains in the windows and a garden plot beside the house and maybe, eventually, children running through the rooms. In early March, Grant took Rose out to see the ranch for the first time. They rode in his wagon through landscape that was beginning to show the first hints of spring, the brown hills touched with green where early grasses were emerging. The ranch sat in a valley with a creek running through it, the water bright and clear as it tumbled over smooth stones. The house was indeed in need of work, a two-story wooden structure with faded paint and a sagging porch, but Rose could see its potential. The bones were good, and the location was beautiful, with views of distant mountains and endless sky. "I know it needs a lot of work," Grant said, sounding nervous as he helped her down from the wagon. "But I have been saving money, and once spring really hits and the horses foal, I will have income to put toward repairs. I want to make it beautiful for you, Rose, a place you can be proud to call home." Rose turned to him, cupping his face in her hands. "Grant, I do not need it to be beautiful. I just need it to be ours." Relief and love shone in his eyes. He kissed her gently, then took her hand and led her inside. The interior was sparse but clean. Grant had clearly been working to make it presentable, scrubbing floors and walls, patching holes. The main room had a large fireplace and windows that let in generous light. The kitchen was small but functional. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, the largest overlooking the valley. "This would be our room," Grant said, standing in the doorway of the master bedroom with Rose. "I thought maybe we could put the bed here, where you can see the sunrise in the morning." Rose imagined waking up beside Grant in this room, starting each day with him, and her heart swelled. "It is perfect." They spent the afternoon at the ranch, and Grant showed her everything. The barn where he kept his horses, the paddocks and pastures, the creek where he wanted to build a small dock for summer swimming. He introduced her to his hired hand, a weathered older man named Pete who had worked for Grant's father and stayed on because, as he put it, the boy made something of himself, and I wanted to see it through. Pete looked Rose over with shrewd eyes, then nodded as though she had passed some unspoken test. "You will do," he said, which Grant later told her was high praise. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Grant and Rose sat together on the porch steps, her head resting on his shoulder. "I could stay here forever," Rose said softly. "You will," Grant said. "This is going to be your home, Rose, our home." They set the wedding date for late April, after the spring calving season but before the heat of summer set in. Clara threw herself into preparations with an enthusiasm that was both touching and overwhelming. She recruited other women in town to help, and despite Rose's fears, most seemed genuinely excited about the wedding. Rose wrote to her mother in Boston, inviting her to the wedding though she knew the journey was likely impossible given their reduced circumstances. Her mother's return letter was tearful and loving, expressing regret that she could not attend but blessing the union with genuine happiness. She wrote that she had feared Rose would never recover from the scandal and heartbreak, and knowing her daughter had found love and purpose in the West gave her comfort in difficult times. The letter made Rose cry, but they were healing tears. She was building something new without erasing where she had come from. As April approached, Rose moved through her days in a state of barely contained excitement. She finished the school term with satisfaction, knowing her students had learned and grown. Several families specifically asked her to return as teacher in the fall, which filled her with pride. The week before the wedding, Grant took her back out to the ranch to see the work he had completed. Rose gasped when they arrived. The house had been painted a crisp white with dark blue shutters. The porch had been repaired and now held a swing Grant had built himself. Inside, the walls had been whitewashed and the floors sanded and sealed. The kitchen had a new table and chairs Grant had commissioned from the town carpenter. Their bedroom held a beautiful brass bed that must have cost a fortune, covered in a quilt that Clara had made as a wedding gift. "Grant, it is incredible," Rose breathed, walking through the rooms with wonder. "How did you manage all this?" "I had help," Grant admitted. Pete and some of the other ranchers and even Mr. Bradley from the mercantile pitched in. "Turns out when people know you are getting married, they want to help." He pulled her close. "Everyone wants us to be happy, Rose. You have won them over just by being yourself." The wedding took place on a perfect spring day at the small church in Santa Fe. Rose wore a simple cream-colored dress that Clara had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair that Grant had picked himself that morning. The church was packed with people from town and surrounding ranches, more than Rose had expected. As she walked down the aisle on Clara's arm, since her own father could not be there, Rose looked at Grant waiting for her at the altar. He was wearing his best suit, his hair combed back, and his eyes were locked on her with such love and devotion that she felt her eyes fill with tears. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. The young pastor spoke about partnership and faith, about building a life together through all seasons. When Grant slipped a simple gold band on Rose's finger, his hands were shaking slightly, which made her love him even more. "I promise to love you, honor you, and prove to you every single day that you belong right here with me," Grant said, departing from the traditional vows. "And I promise to be brave enough to accept that love and to build a life with you that is real and true," Rose responded. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Grant kissed her with a tenderness that made the entire congregation sigh collectively. The reception was held at the community hall, with food contributed by dozens of families and music provided by the same fiddle player from the February dance. Rose danced with Grant, with Pete, with Mr. Bradley, with several of her former students' fathers. She laughed until her sides hurt and ate until she was full and felt surrounded by genuine warmth and community. Even Lily Phillips appeared, though she stayed only briefly. She approached Rose during a lull in the dancing, her expression stiff, but not hostile. "I owe you an apology," Lily said without preamble. "I was cruel at the dance, and that was unworthy of me. Grant is clearly happy, and you seem like a good woman. I hope you will accept my apology and my best wishes." Rose was surprised but gracious. "Thank you, Lily. That means a great deal. And I hope you find happiness as well." Lily gave a small smile and left, and Rose felt a weight lift. Not everyone would accept her, but she had won over the ones who mattered. As evening turned to night, Grant and Rose slipped away from the celebration. Grant had the wagon waiting, and they rode out to the ranch under a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch. Inside their home, Grant lit lamps and built up the fire while Rose stood in the middle of the main room, taking it all in. This was hers now, theirs, a place where she belonged. Grant came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Welcome home, Mrs. Carson." "Mrs. Carson," Rose repeated, loving the sound of it. "That will take getting used to. We have the rest of our lives," Grant murmured, turning her in his arms. "I love you, Rose. Thank you for taking a chance on me, on this place, on us." "Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself," Rose said. "Thank you for proving that I belong." Grant kissed her deeply, and Rose kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it. He lifted her in his arms and carried her up the stairs to their bedroom, and Rose laughed with pure joy. They made love for the first time with the windows open to let in the spring breeze, with moonlight painting silver patterns on the walls. Grant was gentle and patient, making sure Rose felt cherished and safe. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, both breathing hard, Rose felt more whole than she ever had in her life. "I never knew it could be like this," she whispered. "Like what?" Grant asked, stroking her hair. "This complete," Rose said. "Like I finally found the missing piece of myself." Grant pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "You were never missing pieces, Rose. You just needed the right place and the right person to reflect back your own strength." They fell asleep wrapped in each other, and Rose dreamed of the future spreading before them like the New Mexico sky, vast and bright and full of possibility. The first year of marriage was an education in both joy and challenge. Rose had never lived on a ranch before, had never had to haul water or tend a garden or deal with the isolation of living miles from town. There were days when the wind blew so hard she thought the house might lift off its foundation. Days when the summer heat made it impossible to think. Days when she missed the ease and convenience of her old life. But there were far more days when she woke beside Grant and felt grateful beyond measure for this life they were building. She learned to cook on the wood stove, eventually becoming proficient at making beans and cornbread and stew. She started a garden that flourished under her attention, producing tomatoes and squash and peppers. She befriended the ranch horses, particularly a gentle mare named Daisy who let Rose feed her apples and braid her mane. Grant taught her to ride, patient as she learned to trust the horse beneath her and her own ability to stay in the saddle. By midsummer, she could ride well enough to accompany Grant when he checked on cattle in the far pastures or repaired fences on the property's edges. They worked side by side through the long days, and in the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the valley. Grant would play a battered guitar he had inherited from his mother, and Rose would read aloud from books, and they would talk about everything and nothing. In September, Rose returned to teaching, riding into town 3 days a week on Daisy. The school board had voted unanimously to keep her on, and she returned with new confidence and new ideas. She continued building the lending library and started a weekly reading circle for women in town, which became surprisingly popular. Grant supported her teaching, never asking her to choose between her work and the ranch. "You need both," he told her when she worried she was neglecting her duties at home. "The ranch is our living, but teaching feeds your soul. I will not ask you to give up part of yourself." That winter was hard, with bitter cold and heavy snows that sometimes kept them isolated for days at a time. But Rose found she did not mind the isolation when it meant long evenings by the fire with Grant, talking and reading and making love in the warmth of their bedroom while wind howled outside. It was during one of those snowy February evenings, almost exactly a year after they had first kissed in the plaza, that Rose realized her monthly bleeding was late. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed, but when another week passed and then another, she finally told Grant. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating as though he could not quite believe it. "Rose, we are going to be parents." Rose laughed through her own tears. "We are. Are you ready for that?" "I have been ready since the day I met you," Grant said. He set her down gently, as though she might break, and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "A little person. Half you, half me. It is a miracle." The pregnancy was not easy. Rose suffered terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon for the first 3 months. The summer heat made her swell and ache. She had to stop teaching in her 6th month when the ride to town became too uncomfortable, which frustrated her even though she knew it was necessary. But Grant was attentive and patient through it all, rubbing her feet when they ached, fetching her water when she was thirsty, holding her hair back when she was sick. Clara came to stay with them for the last month, wanting to be there to help when the baby came. In late September of 1879, as the leaves were turning gold in the valley and the air held the first crisp hint of autumn, Rose went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Clara attended her with calm efficiency, and Grant held her hand through the worst of it, never flinching even when she squeezed hard enough to bruise. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Rose gave one last tremendous push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's angry cry. "It is a boy," Clara announced, tears streaming down her face. "A beautiful, healthy boy." She placed the baby on Rose's chest, and Rose stared down at the tiny, red, furious face in wonder. He had a shock of dark hair, and his eyes were screwed shut as he wailed his displeasure at being born. "Hello, little one," Rose whispered, and immediately the baby quieted as though he recognized her voice. "I am your mother, and I love you so much already." Grant knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of such profound love and amazement that Rose fell in love with him all over again. "He is perfect," Grant said hoarsely. "Rose, you did it. You are incredible." They named him James Grant Carson after Grant's maternal grandfather. Jamie, as they quickly began calling him, was a hungry, determined baby who wanted to be held constantly and voiced his displeasure loudly when his needs were not immediately met. "He takes after his mother," Grant teased, "knows what he wants and is not afraid to demand it." "I was never that demanding," Rose protested, but she was laughing. Those first months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming and more wonderful than Rose could have imagined. She spent hours just watching Jamie sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way his mouth moved as he dreamed. Grant was a devoted father, walking the floor with Jamie when he was fussy, changing his nappies without complaint, singing to him in a low voice that made Rose's heart melt. Rose did not return to teaching that fall, needing to focus on Jamie and recovering from the birth. She missed it, but she also knew it was temporary. Clara helped find a young woman to take over the school, with the understanding that Rose would return when she was ready. As Jamie grew, the house filled with laughter and life. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Grant built him a cradle that rocked gently, and Rose sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Pete came by regularly to visit, bringing hand-carved toys and telling stories that made Jamie gurgle with delight even though he was too young to understand the words. The second spring after their marriage, when Jamie was 6 months old and beginning to sit up on his own, Rose and Grant took him out to see the ranch in full bloom. The valley was carpeted with wildflowers, and the creek ran high with snowmelt from the mountains. They spread a blanket beside the water and let Jamie lie in the sunshine, kicking his legs and grabbing at flowers Rose placed within his reach. "This is what I want for him," Rose said, watching her son. "To grow up knowing he belongs, knowing he is loved, knowing he can be anything he wants to be." "He will," Grant said. "Because he has you as his mother, you are going to teach him to be brave and kind and true to himself." "We will teach him," Rose corrected. "Together." Grant leaned over and kissed her soft and sweet. "Together," he agreed. By the time Jamie was walking, Rose felt ready to return to teaching part-time. Clara happily took care of Jamie 2 days a week, and Rose rode into Santa Fe to teach, finding she had missed it more than she realized. Her students were thrilled to have her back, and the parents welcomed her with open arms. Rose discovered she could balance both lives: mother and teacher, rancher's wife and independent woman. It was not always easy, and there were days when she felt pulled in too many directions, but Grant never made her feel like she had to choose. They worked together, supporting each other's dreams and sharing the load of daily life. When Jamie was 2 years old, Rose found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She taught through her 5th month, then handed the class over to her assistant with plans to return in the fall. In August of 1881, Rose gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Clara Carson after Rose's mother and Clara Morrison. Eliza, as they called her, was tiny and delicate, with Grant's blue eyes and Rose's dark hair. She was a quieter baby than Jamie had been, content to watch the world with solemn attention. Jamie was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Grant had to gently restrain him from holding Eliza constantly, explaining that babies were fragile and needed careful handling. "I will protect her," Jamie announced with all the seriousness of a 2-year-old. "Nobody will hurt my sister." Rose felt her heart might burst from the sweetness of it. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Grant's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and buyers came from as far as Colorado to purchase his stock. He expanded the herd and hired 2 more hands to help Pete, who was getting older but refused to retire. The house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with a larger kitchen and a parlor where Rose could host her book club. Rose continued teaching, cutting back to 1 day a week when Eliza was born but never giving it up entirely. She also began writing a column for the local newspaper about literature and education, which was well received. The lending library she had started in the schoolhouse grew into a small but respectable collection housed in a donated building near the church. Jamie grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the horses and following his father everywhere. Eliza was quieter but equally determined, with a gift for drawing that reminded Rose of young Thomas from her first class. They were good children, loving and loved, growing up with the certainty that they belonged exactly where they were. In 1884, when Jamie was 5 and Eliza was 3, Rose discovered she was pregnant again. She was 31 years old now, more confident and capable than the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 6 years earlier. This pregnancy resulted in another son, born in the spring of 1885. They named him Thomas Peter Carson, after Rose's father and Pete, who had passed away peacefully in his sleep the winter before. Tommy, as they called him, was a perfect combination of his siblings, with Jamie's energy and Eliza's thoughtfulness. Grant was 40 now, with silver threading through his fair hair and lines around his eyes from years of sun and laughter. He was still strong and capable, still the man who had promised to prove Rose belonged. But now that promise had been fulfilled so completely that neither of them thought about it anymore. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grant surprised Rose by taking her back to the plaza where they had first kissed. It was April again, the air warm and scented with blossoms. The children were with Clara for the evening, giving them a rare few hours alone. "Do you remember standing here that day?" Grant asked, his arm around her waist as they stood in the exact spot where their relationship had begun. "I remember being terrified," Rose said. "I remember thinking I did not belong anywhere." "And now?" Grant asked. Rose looked around the plaza, at the town that had become her home, then up at her husband's dear, familiar face. "Now I know that I belong everywhere you are, that we built this life together and it is more than I ever dreamed possible." "You saved me too, you know," Grant said quietly. "I was just going through the motions before you came, working myself to exhaustion to avoid feeling lonely. You brought life and light and purpose to everything. You made the ranch a home." Rose kissed him there in the plaza, just as they had 10 years before, and it felt like coming full circle. They walked home slowly, talking about their children and their plans for the future. Jamie would be starting school in the fall, and Eliza was already showing interest in books. Tommy was still a baby, but he was curious and active, always getting into things. The ranch was doing well, better than Grant had ever hoped. Rose's library was growing steadily, and there was talk of making her the official town librarian with a small salary. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life," Rose said as they approached their house, golden light spilling from the windows into the gathering dusk. "That I get to have you and the children and this beautiful place." "Believe it," Grant said, pulling her close. "You earned every bit of it, Rose. You were brave enough to start over, to believe you could belong somewhere new. That takes courage most people never find." "I had help," Rose said, smiling up at him. "A cowboy who promised to prove I belonged right here. Did I succeed?" Grant asked, though his eyes were twinkling with humor. "You did," Rose said. "Every single day you still do." They went inside their home, where their children were waiting with Clara, excited to show their parents the cake they had helped make for the anniversary. Rose looked around at her family, at the life they had built together, and felt complete. The years continued to pass in a blur of ordinary happiness and small triumphs. Jamie grew tall and strong, following in his father's footsteps with horses. Eliza developed her artistic talent, filling the house with drawings and paintings. Tommy proved to be a natural scholar, devouring books as fast as Rose could provide them. Rose continued her teaching and library work, becoming a respected figure in Santa Fe's growing educational community. She mentored new teachers and advocated for improved school facilities. Grant's ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, and they were able to help several young families get started with land and loans, paying forward the kindness that had been shown to Grant years before. In 1889, New Mexico was still a territory, but there was growing talk of statehood. Rose and Grant attended meetings about the future, excited to be part of the territory's evolution. Their children were growing up in a different world than either parent had known, one where opportunities seemed limitless. On a warm evening in June of 1891, with Jamie now 12, Eliza 9, and Tommy 6, the family gathered on their porch after supper. The sun was setting over the valley in a spectacular display of orange and pink, and the air was sweet with the scent of Rose's garden. Jamie was whittling a piece of wood under his father's guidance, learning to make the same kind of toys Pete had once carved. Eliza was sketching the sunset, her tongue poking out in concentration. Tommy was curled against Rose's side, begging for one more chapter of the book they were reading together. Grant caught Rose's eye across the porch and smiled, that same warm smile that had captured her heart 13 years ago. She smiled back, her heart full. "Tell us again about when you met Papa," Eliza said suddenly, looking up from her drawing, "about how you came to Santa Fe." It was a story the children loved, asking for it again and again. Rose exchanged a look with Grant, who nodded encouragingly. "Well," Rose began, "I arrived on a cold January day, frozen clean through and full of doubt. I did not think I belonged here, did not think I could make a life in such a different place. But then you met Papa," Tommy piped up, knowing the story by heart. "But then I met your father," Rose confirmed, reaching over to take Grant's hand, "and he made me a promise." "What promise?" Jamie asked, even though he knew. "He said he would prove that I belonged right here," Rose said, squeezing Grant's hand, "and he did. Every single day since then, he has shown me that this is where I am meant to be." "Because you love each other," Eliza said matter-of-factly. "Because we love each other," Grant agreed. "And because we were both brave enough to take a chance, to believe that we could build something good and lasting. And because Mama was strong enough to start over when everything was hard," Rose added, wanting her children to understand that part of the story. "Sometimes being brave means doing something even when you are scared." The children nodded solemnly, absorbing the lesson. Then Tommy yawned hugely and Rose laughed. "Time for bed," she announced, standing and scooping up Tommy despite his protests that he was not tired. "Come on, all of you. Tomorrow is Sunday, and we have church in the morning." The children groaned but obeyed, following Rose inside. Grant brought up the rear, banking the fire and locking the doors. Upstairs, he helped Rose get the children settled, reading them a story from the Bible before kissing each one goodnight. In their own room, Rose brushed out her hair while Grant got ready for bed. She studied her reflection in the mirror, seeing the changes time had brought. She was 38 now, with fine lines around her eyes and silver beginning to thread through her dark hair. Her hands were rougher than they had been in Boston, marked by years of work and living, but her eyes held a contentment and confidence that had never been there before. She liked the woman looking back at her from the mirror, this woman who had built a life through courage and love and sheer determination. Grant came to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "How different I am from the woman who arrived here 13 years ago," Rose said. "How much I have changed." "Changed or became who you were always meant to be?" Grant asked. Rose considered that. "Became who I was meant to be," she decided. "With your help." "We helped each other," Grant said. He leaned down to kiss her neck. "You made me better too, Rose. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, a family to work for instead of just a ranch to maintain. You gave me purpose beyond survival." Rose turned in his arms, tilting her face up to kiss him. After 13 years of marriage and 3 children, his kisses still made her heart race. They moved together to their bed, making love with the comfortable passion of long familiarity, each knowing exactly how to please the other. Afterward, lying wrapped in Grant's arms in the darkness, Rose thought about that frozen, doubtful woman who had stepped off the stage coach so long ago. She wished she could go back and tell her younger self that everything would be all right, that she would find love and purpose and belonging beyond anything she could imagine. But then again, maybe the journey was what mattered. Maybe she had needed to be that lost, scared woman in order to become this confident, loved woman. Maybe the transformation was the whole point. "Grant," she whispered into the darkness. His voice was drowsy on the edge of sleep. "Thank you for keeping your promise. For proving I belong here." Grant's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for believing me, for being brave enough to stay." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the life they had built together through faith and love and the willingness to take a chance on something new. The years continued to pass with their mixture of joy and challenge. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick children and financial worries, the normal trials of life on a ranch in the late 19th century. But through it all, Rose and Grant faced everything together, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. Jamie grew into a young man his father could be proud of, taking on more responsibility with the horses and eventually running much of the ranch operation. Eliza's artistic talent flourished, and she began selling her paintings to tourists who came through Santa Fe, drawn by the region's unique beauty. Tommy proved to be a gifted student, and Rose began to dream of sending him to university someday, something that would have seemed impossible when she first arrived in New Mexico. In 1895, when Rose was 42 and Grant was 50, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children, now 17, 14, and 11, planned a surprise party with the help of Clara, who was now in her 70s but still spry and active. The house was filled with friends and neighbors, people who had become family over the years. Rose looked around at all the faces, thinking about how she had arrived in Santa Fe knowing no one. And now she was surrounded by community and love. Grant pulled her aside during the party, leading her out to the porch where they could have a moment of relative privacy. The April evening was soft and warm, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. 20 years, Grant said, shaking his head in wonder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you step off that stagecoach, looking like you might blow away in the wind." "I almost did," Rose admitted. "If you had not been there, if you had not seen something in me I could not see in myself, I do not know what would have happened." "You would have been fine," Grant said confidently. "You have always been stronger than you believed. I just helped you see it." Rose leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever have regrets?" she asked. "About choosing me, about the life we built?" Grant pulled back to look at her, his expression incredulous. "Regrets? Rose, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything, a family, a real home, a reason to be a better man. I wake up every morning grateful that you took a chance on me." "I am the one who should be grateful," Rose said. "You saved me, Grant. You gave me a life worth living." "We saved each other," Grant said firmly. "And we built something that is going to last long after we are gone. Look at our children, Rose. Look at what we created together." Rose thought about Jamie's strength and character, about Eliza's creativity and determination, about Tommy's brilliant mind and kind heart. They were good people, being raised with love and values and the certainty that they belonged in the world. "We did well," she agreed softly. "We did," Grant said. He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have something for you. It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Rose opened the box to find a delicate silver locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of their family, all 5 of them together, taken by a traveling photographer the previous year. "So you can carry us with you always," Grant said, "though I know we are already in your heart." Tears slipped down Rose's cheeks as she let Grant fasten the locket around her neck. "It is perfect. Thank you." They stood together on the porch, looking out over the valley that had been their home for 2 decades, and Rose felt the truth of Grant's old promise settle deep in her bones. She did belong here. This was her place, her home, her life. And it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined during that cold January day when she had arrived frozen and full of doubt. The party continued inside, but for a moment, Rose and Grant stayed on the porch, holding each other and watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and promise, built on the solid foundation of the love they had nurtured for 20 years. "I love you, Rose Carson," Grant murmured against her hair. "I love you, Grant Carson," Rose replied. "Today and always." They went back inside to their family and friends, to the life they had built together through faith and courage, and an endless supply of love. And as Rose looked around at all the faces, at her children laughing with their friends, at Clara beaming with pride, at Grant's hand warm and steady in hers, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The storybook ending she had stopped believing in as a heartbroken woman in Boston had come true in the most unexpected way, in the most unexpected place, with a cowboy who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. And every day since then had been proof that she belonged right here, building a life full of love, purpose, and joy in the wild, beautiful land of New Mexico. Years later, when Rose was an old woman with silver hair and grandchildren at her feet, she would tell them this story. She would tell them about the scared young woman who had arrived in Santa Fe with nothing but a carpet bag and a heart full of doubt. She would tell them about the cowboy who had promised to prove she belonged. And she would tell them that sometimes the best things in life come when you are brave enough to start over, to believe in new possibilities, to trust that you deserve love and happiness, even when everything seems lost. But for now, on this perfect April evening in 1895, Rose simply held her husband's hand and smiled at her children, and felt grateful for every moment of the journey that had brought her here. The story was not over yet, but the happiest part, the part that mattered most, was the love that had sustained them through it all and would continue to sustain them through whatever came next. In the end, Grant had kept his promise completely. He had proven, day after day and year after year, that Rose belonged right here. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, the chance to become fully, completely, joyfully herself.